One of my favorite things that the Lord does throughout the Gospels and his teachings is that he oftentimes throws out an image with what seems to be a very clear and very obvious teaching. And then right at the end, he says, oh wait, never mind, actually, I mean the opposite. And he does that in today's gospel. I don't know if you noticed it or if you caught it. He uses these two images, right? Building a tower and a king going into battle. And he says, one who's building a tower first needs to sit down and make sure that they have enough to build the tower. And then he says, a king going into battle, first he needs to sit down and make sure that he has enough to win the battle. And then right at the end, he says this, in the same way, any of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. He completely turns it around. Anyone who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Jesus is inviting us into some kind of calculation. He is inviting us to sit down and to make sure that we have what we need to be a disciple. But rather than asking ourselves, do I have enough to be a disciple? What he invites us to ask ourselves is, do I have a sufficient lack to be a disciple? Am I missing enough to be a disciple? Or rather, do I have too much to be a disciple? I was reading just this morning a reflection, and this priest who wrote this reflection said, the Lord will never answer a prayer, the result of which is us relying less on him. The Lord will never answer a prayer, the result of which is us relying less on him. This is the fundamental lesson of discipleship, right? Is that we must rely on the Lord. I cannot make myself holy. You cannot make yourself holy. You cannot get yourself to heaven. Only the Lord can get us to heaven. And it seems what Jesus is telling us in our gospel today is if we have too much, if we've amassed too many things, or too much power, or too much whatever it is, then we start to fall into a temptation to think, I am enough and I have enough by myself, and I don't need the Lord. In some sense, I think there's this fundamental drive that we have as humans, or especially we see this in parents, right? We want to raise our children to get to the point where they're not just constantly relying upon us for everything. That they reach some level of independence, right? Where they can take care of themselves. And that's a good thing on a human level, right? But in our relationship with the Lord, we must never reach that level. We cannot reach that level. In fact, what we're trying to do is recognize the opposite. That more and more in everything, we need to depend on God. We need to overcome our own need to provide for ourselves holiness and joy and grace and all of those things that we can't provide for ourselves. And we need to learn more and more to lean on the Lord. And so our prayer today as we come to the Lord in the Eucharist is that we may always be missing something, that we can always have a lack in our lives, so that we'll always have something for which to rely on the Lord.